The creatures and deities of myth all inhabit the Akashic, this land being the collective will and memory of our, humanity's consciousness. As of today, there is still a common assertion that these beings can possess a human vessel, these figures of the Akashic commonly being taken on by a host in trance. However, in ancient past, it was common for these figures to be called out of the Akashic in their own physical forms, by use of esoteric knowledges commonly held in grimoires that would be used and hidden by feared magicians or shamans. These grimoires have, sadly, been swept away by the tides of time, causing this practice to become rare, though not unheard of, in the modern era. Many of these lost or fragmentary scripts are simply waiting to be unearthed from the lost scriptures of the Akashic. Attention all passengers, the plane will be reaching its destination soon. Jason awoke with the start of the sound of the PA system. Guess it's almost time to head out. This was Jason's first trip on an airplane and he had been anxious about it. Luckily that anxiety was unneeded, it seemed. After the initial excitement, he slept most of the ride. He glanced out the window and surveyed the town below as he wiped the sleep from his eyes. If Jason had wondered how the town Crescent Hill had gotten its name, the answer was now apparent. The grouping of hills a small ways from the town certainly resembled the shape of a crescent moon. Jason collected his carry-on luggage and sighed while looking at the line of people forming in the aisles. The process of waiting and shuffling through crowds that was a part of boarding the plane would begin anew as he left. Jason looked around the airport excitedly, but did not see his father. Jason's mother and father were both archaeologists, and Jason's mother would be in Europe for a couple of months. So the plan was that he would be living with his father for the remainder of the summer. His parents had been divorced about a year and a half prior, and Jason had not lived under the same roof as his father in all that time. In all actuality, Jason only rarely spoke to his father in that time, mostly over internet chat. This trip in his mind would be a chance to really reconnect after all the time they were apart. He had been looking forward to this summer. Jason collected his things and found a seat, his eyes searching the terminal for a while. He took out his phone in order to check the time. It was nearly half an hour past the time the plane was scheduled to land. His father was supposed to be there. Jason dialed his number. Yes, hello? A slightly annoyed voice answered the call. Dad, I'm here at the airport. You on your way? Oh yeah, it's already that time, huh? It was clear to Jason that his father Richard had forgotten all about picking him up that day. I told her this wasn't a good time. I'm almost ready. Almost ready? The hell does that mean? Jason wondered. Dad, you gonna be here soon? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm actually at an auction right now. I'll be there in a while. Silence. Jason held the phone for a few seconds, confused. For the past couple of days he had only felt excited for this trip. He thought that it would be a great opportunity to spend time with his father, and maybe have cool stories to bring back to his friends after the summer had ended. He would be entering his senior year. Now that excitement has crashed, he felt dejected, abandoned. Damn it, why wasn't his father there to pick him up? Did he even want to see him? His excuse for not being there is because of some kind of an auction? What was his problem? Jason remembered his parents fighting because his father was too obsessed with his work. Jason wondered if this was what his mother was speaking of. No wonder Mom left him. Jason pulled a book out of his bag to pass the time. After a while of scanning the pages, he found he wasn't in any mood to read. So he leaned his head back against the cool glass of the window behind his seat, looking up at the stars. The stars were a lot brighter out here, he thought. Probably the only thing that is going to be brighter. Jason. Hey, Jason, get up. Jason woke with a start for the second time that day, this time due to someone shaking his shoulder. Whoa. It took Jason a moment to recognize the man in front of him, and not just due to him being half asleep. His father looked more aged, more serious than a year and a half could account for. Let's go. Jason looked at his phone. It had been over 2 hours since the phone call. What the hell took you so long? I was at the auction. I told you earlier. I told your mother this isn't a good time. I don't think it's a good time for me either. This was the only answer Jason could muster. He hadn't seen his father in such a long time, and this is how he was greeted. He's just too obsessed with his work these days. The phrase came back to him. He only knew his father as a kind man. He always looked up to him. Could an obsession with his work really cause him to change so much? Jason didn't know. All he knew is that after the plane ride, he was exhausted physically, and what transpired since the landing was emotionally draining. Jason, after collecting his luggage, followed Richard to the parking lot. What is this? His father had clearly gotten a new vehicle. I told you I was at an auction. What kind of an auction? Livestock. Clearly. As Jason got closer to the trailer attached to the back, he saw a pair of inhuman eyes staring back at him. Is that a frickin' cow? Moo! Would be the only answer he received in reply. His father wordlessly made his way around around the truck to the driver's seat. Well, all right. Jason placed his luggage in the truck and sat in the passenger seat. The truck drove smoothly over the moonlit road, and on either side of the road was unfamiliar territory to Jason. Arid land with plant life whose biology had transformed their shape in order to survive severe dry conditions. This was at odds with the surroundings Jason was accustomed to in the more northern, concrete city he was raised in. Add these alien surroundings to the events that had transpired that day, and the result was a mood almost dreamlike. In the morning he was excited, in the evening he was disappointed, angry, and after seeing the truck and trailer he was just confused. Hey, Dad, why did you buy a cow? I needed it for a project. How could you get any more vague than that? Is that what you meant earlier, that it was a bad time? Yes, I've been working on this for quite some time. You know my work can be strange sometimes. You would always talk about how odd the artifacts I found were, or how indecipherable hieroglyphics seemed to be. Jason did remember saying things to that effect when his father was attempting to translate text in a lost language. In the month before his parents' divorce, he was trying to decipher a text such as this. Going over such hieroglyphics was the only thing he seemed to be able to focus on. Jason was caught up in his own life, his own world at the time, and paid no heed. It was his father's job, after all. What business of this was his? But could that obsessiveness have led to the transformation of the man that was next to him? Jason sighed and sunk into the passenger seat, realizing this was going to be a long summer vacation. Finally, the truck turned off the road and into the parking lot of a small house. Jason groggily unloaded his luggage and followed his father into the house, where he was led to the room he would be staying in. The bed, along with the rest of the room, had accumulated some amount of dust. Jason brought his luggage to a corner of the room and dropped it, and despite the dust, immediately fell into the bed. He was exhausted. If you need anything, I'll be in my office. He made to leave, but then he stalled by the door. Was he looking for something to say? If I am not home by tomorrow night, things might have gone awry with what I am working at Crescent Cave. Then he shut the door, walked down the hall, and was gone. Jason was too tired to wonder towards the significance of this last statement. He fell asleep soon afterwards. Jason awoke to the sunlight that invaded the room. The curtains did not seem to be much of a defense against it. He unpacked the clothes in his bags and took out a towel, planning for a shower, and came to the realization that he had no idea of the layout of the house. He was a stranger here. He wandered the surprisingly barren house. The only giveaway that it was lived in was the kitchen, with its sink full of dishes and bulging garbage bag which looked overdue for being taken out. The den and the hallway, in contrast, had dusty walls and were not furnished. The end of that hallway was where he found the bathroom. The laundry hamper was nearly full. Jason began to expect that no chores were done in this house until they became a real issue. He hung his towel on a rack by the sink and began to take a shower. He found the shower to be refreshing, a little secluded normalcy where his only thoughts were of the feeling of warm water falling over his head. Jason found his way back to the kitchen and started checking the fridge for something to eat. He did not need to smell the milk to tell it had gone bad. There were a few take-out food containers, but he dared not risk food poisoning by trying to eat them. He checked the freezer. Bingo, he said to himself. There were a few stacks in there of different food boxes, frozen dinners, fish sticks, and sausages. This last box he grabbed as a picture of a delicious breakfast was displayed tantalizingly on the front. Jason checked the directions on the back of the box and threw the sausages into the microwave. While they cooked, he pondered if frozen microwave food was the staple of his father's diet, and sighed as he wondered if it would also be his diet over the summer. Jason leaned against the counter and ate the sausages that just came out of the microwave. They weren't very good at all, but he ate them despite the false expectations gained from the picture on the front of the box, due to the fact he was hungry. After he bit into half of the fifth sausage, there was a knock at the door. He chewed as he walked to the door and opened it. There was a police officer on the other side. A hard swallow. Is there a problem, officer? Jason nervously gave the cliched line he heard people say on television. Silly line, he thought. even as he said it, but he could not think of anything else to say and he felt he had to say something. "You Rich's kid?" The police officer asked tersely, but not because of any stoicism, Jason thought. More like he was having trouble determining how to approach the situation. The officer's eyes gave away some feelings of apprehension and worry, but that was underneath another emotion that was his stature also helped to give away. And that was a feeling of exhaustion. "Yeah, I'm Jason." Jason answered, also apprehensive about the forthcoming conversation. "Cops don't show up at your door in the morning with good news." "Well, Jason, I'm Officer Rogers." A truck and trailer were found on the side of the road. We believe there must have been a crash. The sausages in Jason's stomach were suddenly iron. His legs felt heavy, but he stood firm. "We believe that the driver was Richard, your father." Believe? The hell does that mean? Jason thought. "However, we have not found the driver. When was the last time you saw your father?" "It was, last night, I guess around 10 p.m. or so. It was before I went to bed." That was the only thing Jason could give to aid Rogers. It wasn't much, Jason thought. It wasn't anything, he corrected himself. Now he was worried the sausages might be coming back up, but through an effort of will they stayed where they were. "Thanks, son," Rogers said with a detectable sympathy in his voice. Because of that, Jason couldn't be mad at him at all. He knew he was angry at his own lack of control or understanding of the situation. "If you hear from him or have any other information," Rogers paused, reached into his pocket to grab a notebook, "or need anything at all," he looked Jason in the eye for a brief moment before writing in the notebook and tearing out the page. "Just call this number, all right?" Jason took the piece of paper. There was a number written on it. He folded the paper and pocketed it. Officer Rogers nodded his head in Jason's direction and turned away, walking back towards his vehicle. Jason shut the door. His mind was all over the place. He found his way back to his room. He fell on his mattress, trying to put together all the information swimming around his brain. The thought that he just lost his father caused him to weep. While trying to consolidate the information in his mind, Jason eventually found what his next course of action had to be. He could not help the police search or investigate what had happened, but he may be able to find the reason why his father was out there that night. It had to have something to do with what he was researching, he reasoned, as it was the only thing he had any focus on. With that in mind, Jason found his way down the hall and at the door leading to his father's study. He tested the knob. It was unlocked, so he stepped in. It was a normal study, large desk, bookshelves, and filing cabinets, all with the organization one would expect from a professional archaeologist. Jason would need to be careful not to knock any stack of books or paper over. On the desk there were books and loose printed pages of different translations of what must have been South American hieroglyphics. The images were organized roughly in squares, and Jason could make out the shape of faces, human and animal. He also thought that some of the shapes may have been hands or insects, but that could just as easily have been his mind creating those shapes as he looked at the pictures. Like those blot tests, he reasoned. Was translating this text what his father was obsessed with? Jason also saw a book on the table that stood out because of the bookmark poking out of its top. He picked up the book. Mesoamerican Myths and Legends. Vague, Jason thought. It was a thick book, too, probably due to the lack of focus to a particular topic. Jason opened the book to where it was bookmarked. The picture on the page was of an anthropomorphic bat walking upright. Arms and hands like that of a human with wings tucked below the arms, attaching at the wrist and waist of the body. It had a small dagger in one hand and a human heart in the other. It was a frightful figure. The name of the entry next to the creature was Kamazotz. The article explained that this name meant death bat. Bats being nocturnal creatures that resided in caves led to them being associated with night, death, and the underworld, and sacrifice. Sacrifice, Jason thought. Is that why he's holding a dagger and heart? Jason sighed and closed the book. What relevance could any of this have on the disappearance of my father, he thought. Jason returned to his room. What am I supposed to do? He had a sudden revelation as he turned towards his door. He remembered what his father had said. He said something about going to Crescent Cave before Jason fell asleep. How had it taken until now for him to remember, to realize the significance? Jason reasoned that Crescent Cave had to be a feature located within that large crescent-shaped hill that he saw from the plane. Jason felt some relief as now at least he had some direction as to where to go next in his investigation. Investigation, Jason thought. Yes, that is what I'm attempting. Jason laid down his head and thought of how he would visit Crescent Cave the following day. Jason opened his eyes and was apparently suspended upside down. There was no light and he struggled to make out any features within the room. He tried to turn his head to look around, but he couldn't. He couldn't move at all. Suddenly he fell. He gasped. However, he had turned in midair and landed on his feet. Now, right side up, he saw that he was not in a room at all, but was in a cave. Many bats were hanging upon the ceiling. There were several stalactites and stalagmites. Jason noticed a figure sitting on the ground next to a stalagmite. He began to walk forward, but he was not in any control of how he walked. Rather, it felt like he was seeing through the eyes of someone else. He looked down at the figure. It was a man. However, it seemed like he was towering over him, like the man below was tiny in comparison to himself. The man spoke, gaining the attention of whoever Jason was seeing through the eyes of. Wait a minute, Jason thought. That voice sounds familiar. He was looking down at the man who he was towering over. What are you going to let me out of here? What is it you are planning? That was Dad. Jason tried to call out to him, but he could not speak. Instead, Jason heard a deep chuckle emerge from himself. Am I dreaming? Jason asked himself. He thought that he must be. He reasoned that in this dream he was seeing through the eyes of some towering creature that lives in a cave in which his father was being held captive. In any case, Jason turned away from the figure of his father tied to a colossal stalagmite and towards the exit of the cave. He walked past what looked to be a blood-covered bench and finally reached the exit. Then he pushed off the ground and began flying. Jason was screaming internally due to the shock. He was careening quickly through the air, miles above the ground, and he had no control of his body, where he was going. If it was up to him, he would have landed immediately. It isn't like Jason had ever been afraid of heights before, but being jettisoned through the air can get you to that point. The thing that was flying would occasionally look to the right and left. Through this, Jason saw that he was suspended in air by bat wings on either side. Next to the road below him, he saw the remains of what seemed to be a crashed truck trailer. Jason thought he had a solution to the situation he had found himself in now. Due to the stress of the past day, coupled with reading about Kamazots, caused him to have this strange dream. However, everything felt so real, seeing through the eyes of what must be a giant bat creature flying in the sky was otherworldly, surely. But it was as vivid as everyday life, and has Jason ever actively rationalized the events within a dream he was having before? He was flying over the city. Everything was so surreal, dreamlike, Jason thought, as it must be a dream. The cityscape was dark, streetlights lighted the road, and the occasional window was lit. Other than that, it was all shadow, save for what was only half-shadowed, lighted only by moon or star glow. But suddenly there came a view of a building that had its lights on, and seemed lively, and this became the focus of what Jason viewed for a few moments. It must be a bar or club to be so lively this late, Jason thought. That thought was interrupted by the sound of that deep chuckle he had heard earlier. Suddenly he was falling out of the sky towards the building. The speed in which Jason fell from the sky caused him to feel sick, and there were no signs of slowing as he approached the building. He crashed through the glass of the storefront. Some people were immediately crushed under his foot. Looking around the room, it must have been a bar. Bottles and taps behind a counter, patrons falling out of bar stools. The crowd began to run towards the emergency exit, away from the beast whose eyes Jason was mere spectator. Suddenly, a large, muscular arm covered in black hair arced through the air, catching most of them. The quick momentum of the arm that had thrust them to the side ended with the sound of a sick thud as they smashed against the wall. There was the sound of gunfire. The focus went away from the gore of those who were just slain, and towards the person responsible for the gunfire, who must have been the bartender. The man was holding a pistol, firing shot after shot in his direction, the bullets fired having no effect that Jason could discern. The beast's arm shot forward and caught the man. The man was easily lifted from the ground, struggling to escape the grasp of that large clawed hand. Jason realized just how large of a monster he was seeing through must be. The man's torso fit easily into the thing's hand. The claw's grip was bounding the poor man's torso while the legs were free to thrash about in a futile attempt of escape. The man was raised to the creature's face. The great thing's eyes closed for a moment, and Jason could only assume what was happening. However, it was evident to him that the creature had bitten into him and was sucking out his blood. After a time, he was thrown across the room, bouncing off the wall and onto the floor like a rag doll. His lifeless eyes now in an unseeing stare that was fixed towards nothing in particular. The creature paused as if it was proud as it looked down at the gore that was its own labor, dispensing of the poor souls who still had the energy to protest, to scream for help, or just in sheer horror. Jason, too, started to scream. Jason awoke screaming as he slowly realized he was in the safety of his bedroom. What the hell was that dream? He pondered this as he wiped the sweat from his soaked forehead. None of that could have been real, could it? But it was unlike any dream he had ever had before. The fact that he could refer to the event as a dream, no matter how surreal or traumatic it was enough to help him calm down. He remembered that last night he made the resolution to visit Crescent Cave, but after that dream, should he? He chastised himself for the feelings of fear he had due to what was certainly just a creation of his overly stressed mind's imagination. He had a reason that he would go into town for supplies beforehand, at least for drinks to stay hydrated. He did not have the know-how to do any serious spelunking. He would just investigate however deep into the cave and the surroundings area he felt he was safe to. With this in his mind, he found his way to the garage. The garage was mostly empty. There was a bench and on it a raincoat that looked like it was covered in dust. Jason chuckled. It must not rain much here, he thought. There was no vehicle. He guessed his father sold his regular vehicle to purchase the truck found totaled on the desert road. The only alternative that Jason could find with a sigh was a bicycle. It was hot enough here as it was, but biking on top of that? This was not going to be much fun. However, it was what would have to be done. There was not much else of an option. After the dreams last night, Jason was getting the jitters with the thoughts of visiting Crescent Hill. He knew it was silly, but the anxiety was still there and it wasn't leaving. Rationally, he knew that there was probably no correlation between the Nightmare Cave and the actual Crescent Cave, and what happened in town was just crazy. Jason decided he would go into town first. Not just because that if everything is normal there, then what happened in his dream was obviously false, but also because he needed some supplies, or at least he told himself that. He rolled the bike out of the garage and was on his way. It took less than 10 minutes to get to the center of town where Jason found a bike rack in front of a gas station. However, that was enough time for Jason to be drenched in sweat. Jason walked into the gas station and immediately found his way to the containers of cold drinks. He bought a gallon of water. Outside, he congratulated himself for visiting town first. If he hadn't, he surmised, he would have died of dehydration before he could have gone to the cave and back on bike. He reasoned he should just go home and leave later when it was not as hot. He let out a sigh of relief as he drank his water. He surveyed the town and it looked normal. He walked down the block, and when he looked right, he could see down the street, and at the end of that block he saw a line of 3 police cars parked next to it. Did someone get pulled over? But the police lights were not on, and why would there be 3 next to each other? This is silly. There's no need to be so paranoid. There were a million reasons why those cars could be there, he assured himself. He walked the way down the block, and when he turned the corner onto the street, he saw it. Jason caught himself against a wall with one hand as he lowered his gallon of water to the ground. His head was spinning. In front of him was a bar. Its storefront had a gaping hole in it. What the hell is happening? This can't be real. The storefront was the exact same one he saw last night in his dream, and judging by the giant hole in its wall, a bus must have went through it. Or a large bat creature the size of a bus, he thought dryly. Jason? A familiar voice called out to him. Jason looked up and saw Officer Rogers walking his way. Are you alright? Yeah, I'm just... For a very brief moment, Jason considered telling the truth, but realized that any explanation he could give would just sound like gibberish. I'm just hot. I'm used to living up north, you know. Roger's eyes narrowed. He seemed worried about Jason. Yeah, I can see how the move down here could be a jarring one. Hey, who's this? A stranger's voice asked, approaching them. It was a middle-aged man, gray intruding upon his otherwise dark brown hair. This is Jason. He just moved down here. The other man looked at Jason as if sizing him up. Chief Long, he said, outstretching a hand in Jason's direction, which Jason shook. You're the missing guy's, Richard's kid, I understand. I've been meaning to talk to you. Follow me this way. Who is this guy, and what does he want? Jason asked himself. And why is he bringing up my father? Did the two know each other, or is there a reason for him to be investigating him in particular? Rogers looked at Long with a visible air of disgust at how he spoke to Jason and shook his head. Meanwhile, Jason followed the man. Chief Long lifted the yellow crime scene tape, and Jason hesitated. Long nodded his head toward the inside of the tape as if to say, come on already. Jason ducked through it, but now he was really questioning what the guy's deal was. Why was he bringing me onto the crime scene? Jason felt a pit forming in his stomach. He was led forward and he saw the gaping hole in the building close up. Everything looked the same as in his dream. There was no question of that anymore. Glass littered the floor. There were scratches and impact marks where the creature must have landed. The bodies were gone. Their location was still being indicated by white tape. The blood, however, was still there, staining the floor in places. Jason felt sick. The official story is that a car crashed through the building. But something is missing if that's the case. Long was staring at Jason, gauging him for any sort of reaction. First, there's no tire marks, no paint left behind, no sign that there was a vehicle involved at all. However, that will still be the official story. We're not going to report the strange black hair, nor the blood found on the glass at the point of impact, both of which have been analyzed and do not seem to belong to any animal we have on record. Nor will we mention the scratch marks that must have come from a creature that is, I don't know. Long paused. He was either looking for what to say next, or as Jason assumed, merely pausing for effect. That is at least 4 times larger than the average adult human. Long was staring at Jason, looking into his eyes, analyzing him for any traces of information, for anything that may betray any knowledge being held from him. You don't know what it could have been, do you? What could Jason's answer be? Oh yeah, of course I know what it is. It's just a giant bat monster I dreamt about last night. Nah, that answer would sound crazy. The answer would be crazy. And with that in mind, he merely kept quiet while Long analyzed his every reaction. This has nothing to do with your dad's disappearance, does it? Jason's mouth was gaping. Did this have anything to do with his father's disappearance? He was studying that Kamazatz, that mythical bat god, but how could he, studying that, be connected to the monster that attacked the bar? Then again, how could it not be? As he was questioning all of this, the conversation with Long was interrupted. Okay, that's enough. He's having a hard time enough as it is, without your mess piled on top of it. Jason was actually relieved to see Rogers. Long scoffed in response. Alright, I'm out of here then. Just make sure you send anything you find to my office. With that, Long walked away. He entered a black car and drove away. Sorry about that, Jace. He's from a special government investigation agency. He has rank over all my guys. People like that tend to get a big head. They think they can say or do anything they like. Yeah, don't worry about it. I think I'll just head home now. Alright, I'll give you a lift. Thanks. For some reason he felt like he could trust Rogers, and that was a good feeling when you are a stranger in town. After returning home, Jason waited a while before gaining the nerve to go out to the cave. He was doubly nervous now that he found at least some of what happened in his dreams held some precedence in reality. However, he also knew he would obsess over the cave if he did not go, and he also knew he did not want to be there when night fell. With that in mind, he knew there was no more time to wait. He would go to the cave and rush back home before the sun set. Now determined, he once again rolled his bike to the road and began pedaling. On either side of Jason was the cracked, arid, almost orange ground of the desert on the outside of the city. In the distance he saw the towering Crescent Hill, his destination. Eventually he saw the crashed truck on the side of the road. He did not get too close, as that would have required walking under police tape and ignoring traffic signs. However, even from this distance, the trailer seemed strange. Jason had never seen the remains of a car crash before, so even seeing the trailer caused an atmosphere of the surreal to come over the area. Jason wondered what kind of impact would have caused the metal of the trailer to twist the way it did, or caused the scratches that were on the side appear to be so uniform. There were no skid marks on the road, nor did Jason see anything that the truck and trailer crashed into. It just sat there in open desert, with no signs around, rendered open like a tuna can, and then likewise discarded. Then a disturbing realization entered Jason's mind. What happened to his father or the cow? There were no signs or remains of any body or any animal having left the scene. He had no answers for any of the mysteries plaguing his mind, so he merely continued moving forward, as he knew he was now moments away from reaching Crescent Hill. Jason leaned his bicycle against a large rock, Crescent Hill towering over him. He looked towards the center of the crescent and saw a relief in the rock. That must be the cave, he reasoned. While walking towards, he caught the glance of something in his peripheral vision. Light was reflecting off of something metallic. He followed the reflection and found that someone had really hidden a motorcycle behind some rocks. Jason did not know whether he should be relieved at someone else's presence or suspicious of whatever motives might have brought them there. Jason's luck has not been all that good in the last couple of days, after all. Jason returned to slowly approaching the cave. He was almost there when he was halted by the smell of rotten death. Jason had never smelled anything like it before, though he knew it had to be a dead animal of some sort as he gagged from the stench. He raised his shirt over his nose, but it did little to shield him from the assault of the stench of rot. All of Jason's reason told him to turn around and leave, but something inside him compelled him to move forward. Was this the same feeling of compulsion that had caused his father to throw himself towards what he was studying to the detriment of all else in life? Jason could never know that answer as his feet slowly and almost as if by their own will pushed him towards the cave. After entering the cave, it took a few moments for his eyes to adjust to the new lighting and also for him to see the signs of disturbance within the cave. However, it was mere minutes before both of these issues had corrected themselves, and Jason found himself holding his nose even tighter as he felt bile begin to rise from the pit of his stomach. The scene before him was horrific. The blood-covered bench was present there, and Jason realized it must be some sort of altar for a sacrifice. It was now apparent what sort of stench of rot was now. There was the corpse of a cow that seemed as if it was tossed to the side of the cave. Jason's mind was boggled by the question of why all this was happening. What could have motivated someone to do something like this, and what kind of person would? Even as Jason asked himself these questions, he already knew the answer. Everything was taken account of except for one thing. The truck and trailer was on the side of the road. The cow, or rather what was left of it, was rotting in this cave. But the final element, and the one of most importance to Jason, was still a mystery. The location of his father, who by Jason's estimation would have had to have been the person who set this whole thing up. No one in their right mind would have done it, but Jason knew that his father was very much not in a normal state of mind. With this in mind, Jason fought the urge to run out of there, and instead carefully skirted around the edge of the cave in order to dodge all the gore in front of him. The cave before him seemed to mainly constitute a straightaway. It wasn't too far in the cave before he saw the figure of a person obscured in darkness, and they seemed to be examining something. They turned around due to, as Jason assumed, him entering within earshot of them. "Hey, who goes there?" questioned a female voice. Jason could not think of an answer before she started walking his way. "Who are you, and what do you know about this place?" she asked, blunt and to the point. There would be no way of dodging the question. I... Jason was stuttering, looking for an answer. He did not really have one. He really was just being dragged along by the events of the last couple of days. The answer that came to his head was simple and honest. I'm just looking for my dad." Jason realized he must have sounded meek and like a child. The woman's stern face seemed to soften. "You're Jason, aren't you?" she asked, and noticed the shock on Jason's face as she knew his name. "I'm, Isabel." She paused, as if deciding what she could and couldn't tell him, and continued. "I was sent here to investigate the strange incidents in town. You must know at least something about them, or you wouldn't be here in this cave, right? Just tell me what you know." She noticed the look of apprehension clearly apparent on Jason's face and continued. "Don't worry if what you have to say sounds crazy. We both walked past a bloodied altar in a cave to get here, so the truth of what is happening will be crazy." And so Jason told her all he knew, the events that transpired when he got to town and what he'd learned. He paused when he realized all that he had left out was the dream. "Is there anything else that's important?" She clearly noticed his reluctance. "This is going to sound stupid, but I had a dream where, well, basically," he was floundering for an explanation. "I was in this cave, but it wasn't me. I was seeing through the eyes of this monster. I think it might have been a giant bat monster, but that is only because of the picture of Kamazats I saw. I never got a good look at the creature because I was seeing through its eyes. And I know that this sounds stupid, but it only seems like it has some significance because I saw the bar that was in my dream. What I mean to say is that in the dream the creature crashed into this bar, and in town I saw that same building with the same damage that was inflicted to it in my dream. That's it, I suppose." "Sounds like you have some sort of psychological connection to this Kamazats creature. No doubt due to your relationship with your father, you put all these events in motion. What a frightful inheritance indeed." Jason was stunned by how normal and cool-headed she spoke about the surreal situation he had found himself in. "So is there anything deeper within the cave?" For some reason, Isabel smiled at this question. "It comes to a dead end right ahead. This is something you'll have to see." "If it's a dead end, why do I need to see it?" Isabel was already moving forward before Jason could get the chance to ask. He followed her onward. Before long, they had reached an area of the cave that looked like it had to have been man-made. "Huh? What is this?" It seemed like it must have been artificial, but it connected to the walls of the cave so naturally it was surreal. "That's our dead end. Come here and see." Jason walked forward to the wall, and Isabel took hold of his wrist. "Check this out." She brought his hand towards the opening in the center of the wall. Jason gasped while the opening seemed as if it could pass through it easily and continue down to the cave. There was resistance when his hand entered into what looked like the open air in the opening of the wall. What he felt was not solid per se, more like what happens when you push two magnets of the same charge towards each other. There is a force of resistance that can be pushed against, but the magnets will never touch, as the force becomes too much to press against. There is no going farther into the cave. What the hell is that? That's the entrance. To what? He was confused, and the smile on Isabel's face told him he was being played with. To the Akashic, or more specifically in this case, because we're dealing with Kamazots, it must be the entrance to Xibalba, the Mayan underworld where he resides. Jason had a faint recollection of seeing the word Xibalba when he was reading the papers in his father's study. But Akashic? What was that? Isabel must have read his mind, because she continued with, I know you must have a lot of questions, but I think we should get you home before nightfall. That's right, Jason thought. This is the last place he wants to be once night hits. Plus, I found this. Isabel raised a journal up to show Jason. We'll see what's in this at your house. Come on, let's get out of here. Once outside of the cave, Isabel rolled her motorcycle out from behind the rocks in which she left it while Jason did the same with his bike. It'll be faster if you ride with me on my bike. I got my own. I'm sure it'll be fine here until tomorrow. Jason explained the directions to his house while she took out a helmet from the back of the motorcycle. She extended the helmet in his direction. Here, that is the only one I carried with me. I didn't think I'd have any passengers. She laughed, putting on a pair of goggles. She climbed onto her motorcycle and patted the seat behind her. Jason climbed on behind her, wary, for he had never rode on a motorcycle before. Hold on. To what, Jason thought. He had never rode a motorcycle before. He had no idea what the passenger was meant to hold on to. By the time the bike had picked up speed, he had his arms by necessity around Isabel, and when she reached max speed, he was holding on for dear life. Jason eventually became accustomed to riding the motorcycle, though his vision of the road and its surroundings were obscured by Isabel's hair that was flying backwards. He realized how tightly he was hugging Isabel out of the shock of the motorcycle picking up speed and loosened his grip as he felt his face grow warm. It wasn't long after that when they reached his house. It felt weird inviting a complete stranger into his father's house, but Jason knew it was also a necessity. After they were seated at a table, there were 100 questions Jason wanted to ask, but he decided on one. What was it you said back in the cave? The Akashic? What's that? The Akashic is, well, it's not like there's any hard proof that it exists at all, but here's the idea. Basically, the Akashic supposedly holds the life experience, the thoughts and beliefs of every human that ever existed. It's a collective between all humans, so instincts and other universal concepts that exist between people originate therein. There's also archetypes, which are the regularly occurring characters or figures within myth. Basically, the creatures or deities of myth are reflections of these archetypes from the collective ideals held within the Akashic. Isabel noticed the confusion on Jason's face. Like I said, it's not like there's any hard proof for the literal existence of the Akashic. It's just a heuristic, a convenient organization tool for people in my work. Which is, in short, investigating strange occurrences that are outside the expertise of regular law enforcement. I mean, when there are signs that an unidentified creature both left a vehicle dismantled on the side of the road and attacked a bar, there's a certain level of expertise that is needed for dealing with that situation. How does that connect with the Akashic? Well, most of the time, mythological creatures are just that, myth. But many cultures' traditions and rituals are ways of accessing the Akashic for the knowledge and power of the past, or drawing out the figures of myth. A great mage wrote a book, The Lost Scriptures of the Akashic, which compared their methods and used holistic terms to describe all of them. Akashic was used to explain the otherworldly domain where the beings resided. So both magic and the summoning of figures from myth is performed by accessing the Akashic and manipulating reality with it. However, this art has been mainly lost to time. For example, traditions seen as superstition would be forgotten, and if not written down, they would just disappear forever. Occasionally, though, this arcane knowledge that the ancients used was preserved in documents, many of these documents hidden. Time, however, has worked to uncover these ancient documents, and through their use one can tap into past knowledge and access certain areas of the Akashic. An example, finding a long-lost ritual for summoning and controlling Kamazots. Is that what my father was trying to do? But why would he want to do such a thing? He probably felt compelled to. The strive for wanting to uncover the unknown is a strong one, and maybe the books or knowledge in itself exerts a power over them, causing them to obsess over want for the knowledge to the detriment of all else in their lives. It can be a madness. Isabel's face was downcast. Jason assumed that, like him, she had some personal experience with this. Isabel reached into a pocket on her jacket and brought out a small leather-bound book. This is a collection of passages I and other members of my family have transcribed by hand from various different copies, different translations of the Necronomicon, a book my family has researched for generations. It also contains numerous other spells I've collected from other works. I, like you, have received a strange inheritance that introduced me to a group of mages, and I eventually ended up here investigating on their behalf. I just want to disclose where I'm coming from. I know how it feels to be left in the dark. And if all goes well, I won't have to summon a Shoggoth. Jason thought that this last sentence was meant as a joke, but the dry laugh that followed him made him feel otherwise. Jason was going to ask her more, but instead he let out a yawn. Hey, you said you went through your father's papers in his study, right? How about you rest while I look those over? It's getting late. Jason nodded in agreement. After showing her to the study, he returned to his room to get some rest. For a moment he thought of how weird a situation he was in. He was allowing some stranger to go through his father's papers in his house, but at the same time Jason only lived here for a couple of days. It didn't really feel like his home either. And what real choice did he have? He was blindly stumbling his way through the situation as it was. It did not matter how strange or dangerous the situation got. Jason was compelled to stumble forward to find the truth nonetheless. That was his last thought before drifting to sleep. Jason was in the cave again. Not the cave of this world, but the cave of the dream world. The Akashic, he thought. He still saw through the eyes of the monster. In his peripheral vision, he saw the man who was tied to the rock. He was trying to get the attention of the monster, but Kamazas ignored him and moved quickly out of the cave. Jason was flying through the air once again and noticed something was different from his last dream. The way the creature flew seemed more deliberate this time, as if he was moving with some plan. At some point the monster focused on a house still flying far overhead. Suddenly it dropped out of the sky towards this building as it had done to the bar the night before. However, Jason found he recognized the building Kamazas was flying towards as it came more and more into focus. That's my house! Jason realized that the monster was not planning on slowing down. At this rate it was going to collide with the building. Jason lurched forward in his bed. He was awakened by the sound of a loud crash as his house shook. Jason stumbled out of his bed and began running towards his door. He did not know where he was going to run to. He only knew the flight response of his mind was screaming at him to move. However, as soon as he left the room, someone grabbed him by his collar and pulled him across the room. Jason realized it was Isabel, her gloved hand tightly clutching his collar. Stay in this circle. Understood? Jason looked down. He and Isabel were standing within a circle that was drawn onto the floor. Within that drawn circle was a star. Yeah, I understand. He lied. He did not understand anything, other than he wanted to survive whatever situation he had found himself in now. He also understood that listening to Isabel was probably the best option in order to accomplish that. There was another loud crash. A large figure exploded through the wall into the room in front of them, rubble flying through the path it had taken through the house. Jason stood frozen, paralyzed. His muscles were telling him to run, but Isabel had told him to stay within the circle. How far could he have run on his trembling legs before he was caught anyway? Isabel simply stood still, her journal open in one hand, her other arm outstretched towards the circumference of the circle, her face showing intense focus. The figure began to rise. There was a sound of splintering wood as it did so. There was only the sound of cracking wood. That figure outside, Jason thought. It must be Kamazas, the legend from that book, the thing in my dreams. Kamazas raised his hands and began tearing at the boards of the wall. The cacophony of splintering wood reached its apex as the roof and walls around them collapsed. Jason fell to the ground as the world around him went black. I am okay? He could not see, but it seemed as if he was completely untouched by the roof's collapse. Suddenly everything was lit back up again as Kamazas threw away what must have been remnants of the roof that were covering him. The moon's blue-silver light gave visibility to the scene before him. Isabel was still standing in the same pose, with the same sense of concentration. And the behemoth Kamazas stood over them. The monstrous abomination's figure was nightmarish, a twisted visage between that of a man and a bat. The familiarity between its image and that of the species of our world did not serve to make its figure more fathomable. It only served to mock the feebleness of Jason's ability to reason as he attempted to rationalize the appearance of the figure before him. Kamazat's face began to twist in what must have been a smile, its mouth revealing large fangs, enamel and spittle all glowing as they reflected the moonlight. Kamazotz raised a colossal arm and sent a clawed fist plummeting down directly at the place in which Isabel stood. Jason still sat there frozen, not finding the will to stand. Jason flinched as the fist was about to make impact, but instead it was deflected. Ripples were sent from the point of the impact and distributed along an invisible force field that protected whoever was within the circle that he and Isabel now occupied. Jason now knew the purpose of the circle was to protect them, but he did not know the extent of its strength, the amount of force it could withstand. Thusly, Jason was forced to sit, waiting an agonizing amount of time while Kamazotz threw punch after punch towards their protection circle, sending shock waves that rippled through a force field that previously could not have been distinguished from the rest of the air around them. And finally, with a look over his shoulder, Kamazotz spread his arms, gave a powerful kick off the ground, and began flying away towards the direction of Crescent Cave. Not soon afterwards, the sky began to glow in purple and orange as the golden rays of the sun at dawn cascaded down. Jason was in a daze as Isabel practically picked him back up off the ground. The reality of what he saw was still too horrific for his mind to properly rationalize. What was certain, however, was the reality before him. His father's house was gone, reduced to rubble by that monster Kamazotz. Let's go into town, Jason. Find a place where we can rest. Jason still was not able to shake that daze as he was being driven the second time he rode a motorcycle into town. Isabel found a hotel there. Jason was so exhausted that as soon as he stumbled through the door to the room, he fell into the bed and slept. He was not visited by strange dreams this time, however, only by the stillness of unconsciousness. Yeah, he's still resting. Isabel was talking to someone on the phone, Jason presumed. That sounds good. See you in a while. This was followed by the click of an ended call. Jason raised himself into a sitting position and adjusted the t-shirt he was wearing. Judging by the sunlight fighting its way through the curtains, it was midday. Jason wiped the sleep from his eyes. He had not felt this well rested since before the plane ride over to this forsaken city. Oh, you're up. Isabel walked into the room, pulled a chair over to Jason, and sat down. I was just talking to one of my co-workers on the phone. He said he should be here in a couple of minutes. Back where, your house, where the building was destroyed, I used a protection circle. It's best not to let civilians see you use magic, but sometimes, as you saw, it's a necessary precaution. Isabel reached into her pocket and pulled out a journal. It was different from the one she showed him yesterday. This is what I found in the cave. I think it's your father's journal. Jason took the journal from her hands in a hurry. He was too eager to wait until Isabel was finished with her explanation. He needed to see what was in the book. He flipped the cover open. It looked to be a transcription of the hieroglyphics that he saw written on the parchments in his father's office. Notes on how to translate them were written to the side. After a few pages of this, he reached a page that seemed to be an amalgamation of the translated text. At the top of the page was the title of his father's project, How to Summon Kamazotz. The text underneath detailed the preparation of the altar in the cave and the use of blood sacrifice. Jason winced as he read these words. No rational person would plot to summon a mythological creature, but to go as far as to plan and prepare a sacrifice, that's insane. Jason was feeling woozy. How far gone was his father, really? Clearly he was not crazy, as Kamazotz clearly existed, but what could his end goal possibly have been summoning such a monster? Jason knew that somewhere along the lines his father's plan had gone awry, otherwise he would not be missing. However, the consequences of the actions he did accomplish were disastrous. In just one night, the lives of the people in the bar were effortlessly taken from them. Who knows how catastrophic the results are going to be if Kamazotz continues? If, Jason ruminated on his own thoughts, if it was more of a win. Jason had no idea as to how to stop it. All he knew is that the only chance at righting the situation would be through Isabel and her group. Isabel rested her hand on her cheek and said not a word, merely watched while Jason tried to work out the complicated mess of his current situation. The silence was broken by a knock at the door. Jason looked up from the journal as Isabel was answering the door. A familiar man walked in. When he caught Jason's eye, he raised 2 white paper bags up to eye level and with a smile. I brought lunch. In the bags were cheeseburgers, the smell making Jason realize how hungry he was. The hotel they were staying in was small. The 3 of them found a place to sit and ate using the burgers wrappers as a plate. Jason, this is the head of that organization I was talking about, Chief Long. Isabel introduced the man, pleasantries being saved until after they began eating. Oh, we met before. I tried to hassle information from him by showing him the wrecked bar. Pissed Richards off with that one, didn't I? Long said with a laugh. Jason laughed as well, a little more nervously. The light atmosphere being strange after the nightmare that was the past couple of days. They finished eating and disposed of the wrappers. Alright now, before it gets too late, let's get to business. Chief Long turned more serious again and brought them back to the task at hand. Basically, her thoughts are as follows. Richard attempted to summon Kamazats using directions he found within an ancient parchment he had found while on an archaeological dig in Mesoamerica. While Long said this, Isabel placed Richard's journal and photocopies of the old hieroglyphic text that must have been taken from Richard's study. Due to the outcome, however, I estimate that things did not go as Richard planned. Our current explanation for this is that there was mistranslation during Richard's research of the documents. Is there anyone else who can translate it? That's the problem. Richard was an expert in the field, and there is no telling how long it took him to translate what he did. We have asked others to attempt the translation, but none of them are as specialized in this department as Richard was. Plus, we don't really have the time to wait for their attempts. Then, what? That's where you come in. You and Isabel. I'll let her take it from here. I am not a magician, just a government agent. Yeah, a magician is close enough, I guess. Have you ever heard of xenoglossia? Jason merely shook his head in response. He had no idea what that meant. The term basically describes a phenomena in which an individual can suddenly be able to speak or read a language that they previously had no knowledge of. The cases that are reported are usually spontaneous, random happenings, but there are also sigils that mages can call upon in order to gain the same effect. Sigils? Mages? What do you mean, like spells? Have you tried that then? A woman who had only met the day before was now explaining the practical uses of magic. Events were just becoming stranger and stranger. Was this my life now? Jason wondered. We have tried, but to no success. We were thinking that you might have better luck. You had the dreams of Kamazats and Xibalba, and that connection between you was proved further when Kamazats knew exactly where to find you when he attacked your house. Jason had not questioned before how or why Kamazats had found his exact location. He was too busy just trying to survive, make it through the situation for him to really question the logic behind the events. Was he and Kamazats connected somehow? And due to his father being the one that opened the portal? A phrase entered Jason's head now, what Isabel had said in the cave, a frightful inheritance. How fitting. Will that really have an effect on the success of sigils, though? Well, magic isn't an exact science, Long said with a pause, waiting for a reaction, presumably, while a sly smile formed on his face. Jason smiled at Isabel's annoyed sigh. We'll just have to see. Let's teach you your first magic trick. Basically, what you'll need to do is copy this sigil. That's a sigil of xenoglossia. It represents a mage's intent. In this case, your intent to translate a long-forgotten language. Where should I copy it? Here, Isabel said, handing him a small leather-bound notebook, a lot like the one she had shown him the other day. I got you this as a gift. A book of shadows, some call it. It's something all mages have. Basically, it is used to copy down the spells that are taught, learned, or found by a mage. Your first page can be this spell. Okay, thanks. He focused on copying down the sigil onto the page as accurately as possible. That's good, Isabel said, leaning in to look at the image. She took his hand in her own two gloved hands, the stars on the gloves somehow taking on more significance to Jason now that they were talking about magic. She placed his hand over the sigil. Now focus on the form of that sigil as you try to decipher the hieroglyphics. I still don't know what they say. It won't come at once. Just cast the image of the sigil in your mind, focus on its shape as you attempt to decipher the words. What does that mean, Jason thought. He looked down at the image he inscribed, memorizing its form and attempted to focus on that shape as he looked back at the hieroglyphics. When he began to lose the shape of the sigil in his thought, he would close his eyes, refocus on the image of the sigil, and look back to the words. The ability is there, Jason, the knowledge stored in the Akashic. Isabel said, a voice farther away. He was too focused. He heard her, but it was as if it were a whisper. Though it may be hidden from you in the unconsciousness right now. The fact that man ever used those hieroglyphics as a language means that the ability to understand them is still held within the Akashic, where all knowledge resides. Eventually, Jason began to make out the words that were written so long ago, so far away, etched into stone. He grasped what was written, what was being said, the meaning, the subtext within the writing that only those most intimate to the text or its contents would be able to comprehend. It was a text about opening up a portal to Xibalba, the underworld, and drawing out Kamazats from its depths. Kamazats demanded sacrifice, and through this sacrifice is how the mage will hold control over Kamazats, exert their will over him, become master to the beast. The sacrifice demanded not just any blood to be spilt, however, it demanded a human's blood to be spread upon the altar, after which Kamazotz would be locked to the mage's tome to be called out when the mage beckoned. One of the hieroglyphics within the text itself was a sigil. To focus on it would open up the barrier between worlds, allowing a mage to travel into Xibalba itself. There was another sigil which would close that portal back, protecting our world from what may wish to crawl out of the other world of Xibalba. Jason's focus was broken when he heard a clatter. He looked down at the journal before him. He had dropped a pencil onto the table, which created the noise which brought his attention away from the text. Within the journal, it seemed, were several pages he had filled out with his translation of the hieroglyphics he was deciphering. He suddenly began to understand what went wrong. But my father sacrificed a cow to summon Kamazotz. The actual translation was for human sacrifice. There are multiple symbols for sacrifice, and it would be understood that this symbol for the word implied it to be human sacrifice. This mess-up caused the portal to Xibalba to open up, but without the added effect of gaining control over Kamazotz. Kamazotz can now leave and enter the portal whenever he wishes. So did you learn how to close it back? Long's stern voice cut through the haze Jason was in after translating the text. Yes, but, I think my father is stuck on the other side of the portal. How do you know that? Long said, face flustered in disbelief. If you found out how to close the portal, we need to go do that now. You saw the bar. You know what is at stake if that portal remains open. I saw my father there in my dream. The same dream that I saw the cave and the attacks by Kamazotz. The attack destroying the bar, my house. Jason was getting worked up now. I know I can trust what I saw in my dreams, and I know I saw my father in that cave. I have to go in there and get him out. Jason, come on. You don't know what is going to be within the Akashic when you enter it? No one from this world does. There is a history of people who have devoted their lives to crossing between worlds. Shamans. But even they, for the most part, are eventually, if not sooner than later, destroyed by the experience. You're with no knowledge of how the Akashic functions. You would most likely just end up getting lost, being killed by the creatures of Xibalba if you tried to cross into that world. But it's my father. I have to go, and I will be as quick as possible. You're not some kind of prophet, Jason. But even if you were, even if your dreams could be trusted and taken at face value as accurate, if you saw your father in that other world, he is already gone now. Chief Long said this as curtly, as matter-of-factly as possible. Jason was silent. He knew there was no room for argument when it came to this discussion. They went over to Jason's notes a few times and decided to go to Crescent Cave as soon as possible to close the portal. They knew that they needed to close the portal before night fell, and there was no reason to stall any further. Long parked his car before the cave. Long's plan was so simple. Say the words in the book, focus on the sigil, and the portal would close. The three of them were walking towards the cave. Jason, Long, and Isabel. Close the portal. Jason could not do that knowing what he saw in the dream. They entered the cave and stood in front of the large inverted T that was the impassable entrance to the Akashic, where Kamazotz resided. It would be so simple to close the portal. Here we are. You ready to close the portal and put an end to this? Yeah, just a few simple words. Time to get this over with. He opened the journal, took out a piece of chalk, and copied a sigil before the opening into that dark recess which was Xibalba. He began chanting the words which were older than the three of them who were hearing them, older than the society that they were members of. That force which repelled those who would enter began to visibly shake, like a cable signal that was being lost, giving way to static. Is it close? Is it closing, Jason? A far-off voice said, Jason too focused to identify who the speaker was. The answer, however, was no. The portal was not closing. That was not the demand being given by Jason's words. Jason stepped through the portal into that other world. Any hands that would try to pull him back were merely pushed away. The portal had opened to him alone, and alone he was as he began walking forward towards the cave of bats that was the abode of Kamazotz. The cave around him still looked normal, though there was the sense of a more oppressive atmosphere, though that may have been just in his mind. Jason continued to press forward, using his cell phone as a flashlight, illuminating the way forward. There was a sense of being watched that he could not shake, and eventually he found the source of this feeling when his flashlight strayed too high. Upon the ceiling of the cave, among the stalactites, were bats. There must have been hundreds of them. Luckily, they were still asleep, probably Jason presumed because it was still daytime. Jason ruminated on the fact he had no way of differentiating between night and day within that cave while he marched forward through it. The darkness would be the same down here underground no matter the time. However, there must be some instinct, some inherited sense shared by all bats that allowed them to know the difference, allowed them to know when the sun had set outside the cave. During these musings to himself, Jason approached what appeared to be the opening to some large open area. That must be the residence of Kamazotz, where my father is, he reasoned. Jason was actually surprised by how well things were going. This side of the cave, this Shibalba side, is not much different than the real-world side. To not jinx that luck, Jason would have knocked on wood, but where would he find any this far underground? He slowly walked into that large opening. He squinted towards the ceiling. He could not make much in that darkness. He had turned the light off. He dared not continue to use his phone as a flashlight. He made out a huge hulking shadow hanging down from the ceiling. It moved slightly, but stayed in the same general position as one would while shifting in their sleep. That is what Jason had to assume Kamazatz was doing, hanging upside down while sleeping, just like the thousands of bats that seemed to cover the ceiling above him. He surveyed the area about him and eventually saw the large stalagmite, with the same general shape he remembered from his dream. That must be where his father is, he thought, and with the greatest of caution slowly walked towards it, ever deeper into that cave. Leaning against a stalagmite, tied to it and unconscious, was Jason's father. Jason shook his father's shoulders to wake him. It reminded him of how his father had woken him back at the airport. Jason was so angry and dejected then. So much has happened in that short time that it makes those feelings seem silly. His father slowly opened his eyes. "Jason!" He then stopped, realizing how loud he was speaking, and frantically terrified looked around after realizing he was safe. The bats were still sleeping, so he continued much more quietly. "How did you get here? We have to get out of here. Go, now!" "You're coming with me," Jason answered, working on loosening the knot of the rope fastening his father. "I don't know how you came here, but you should not have. I got myself in this situation. You shouldn't have to go down with me." His voice sounded tired, weak. "Nobody's going down at all." The rope came loose. Jason grabbed his father by the arm and lifted him up. His father staggered forward. The few days he spent in the House of Bats had taken their toll on him. Jason pushed him to move forward as fast as he could. He knew they needed to exit this cave as quickly as possible. There was a loud thud that echoed behind them. An immediate sense of dread entered into Jason that chilled him to the core. That chill was broken as a swarm of bats began dropping from the ceiling and swarming around their heads, Jason's free arm covering his face. Jason pushed his father to move faster, whose staggered limp was looking akin to a pained skip as he hurried forward. "Jason, you gotta leave me here. I'll continue to follow, but you've gotta move ahead faster." "No way, we're getting out of here together." The cave shook as Jason pictured Kamazatz's hulking form hitting the walls of the cave as he hurried after them. Jason and his father crossed the inverted T. The real world, Jason thought, but he had no time to be relieved. The swarm of bats were still pushing forward, and he knew by the shaking of the cave the loud echoes of the impact of large feet hitting the floor were becoming louder and more worryingly closer. But if they hurried, they could make it out of the cave. But then where would they go? Jason had no time to really question exactly how to get out of the situation, only that he had to get out of it. He noticed the sounds from deeper in the cave had stopped as he reached the area where the altar was sitting. "No!" Jason exclaimed as he found the reason why the sound of footsteps had stopped following them. It was because Kamazatz had taken flight and was flying over their head now. Jason's attempt to halt so quickly sent him falling onto the ground. Kamazatz landed before them, blocking the exit of the cave. Kamazatz turned to face them, a grin forming on its monstrous face, a chuckle escaping from behind large fangs. "We're trapped," Jason thought while pushing himself backwards away from the monster with his legs. "And Kamazatz know it has us trapped." Kamazatz eyed Jason with its pitch-black eyes. It raised one clawed hand and lunged towards him. "This is it. I'm going to be killed in this cave by this monster." Jason's eyes were shut tight as he awaited the impact of that claw which would end his life. Jason opened his eyes slowly as he realized that impact had not happened. Standing in front of him, arms outstretched, was his father. "No! No!" He screamed, realizing that his would-be killing blow had instead struck his father. "We were so close to getting out together, and now, for nothing." These thoughts were broken as Kamazatz wantonly tossed his father's motionless body onto the cave floor. Kamazatz's attention was redirected once again to Jason. Kamazatz took his time, licking the blood from his claws and hand. He had all the time in the world to dispatch of Jason. "Jason!" Jason's head jerked backwards as the call of a man he had thought lost. His father, gaining whatever balance he could by holding onto the altar. With this sacrifice, take control of Kamazatz. And with that last demand, Richard fell forward over the altar, never to rise again. Kamazatz had looked over, distracted by this display, while Jason realized that his journal of sigils had fallen from his pocket onto the ground in front of the monster. Kamazatz was so distracted, so sure of himself, that he did not notice that the journal opened to the page of that sealing sigil as if by providence. By that time it was too late for Kamazatz. He had no power to stop Jason from uttering that ancient rite that would seal the contract between them. Jason claiming mastery over Kamazatz, who was now bound to the journal. A new sigil entered that book, denoting his entrance. Jason stumbled out of the cave. He had lost the person for whom he had entered Xibalba to save. He wept at his lack of power. He had only survived the situation himself because he took advantage of the fact that his father had sacrificed himself. What type of monster could live by taking advantage of such a thing? Me, he answered, his own thoughts. Jason wandered out of the cave towards the road. He staggered up the road, passing the car crash that signaled the beginning of these events. It was dark out, so he stayed well away from the road itself. A car briefly slowed to a stop beside the road. Maybe they thought he was a hitchhiker, but they continued on. It was cold. The first time since he landed that the weather was not oppressively hot. Jason shambled forward, not knowing where he would go once in town. His house is gone and he has no family or friends there. The only people he had any connection to there were those detectives. This thought was interrupted by a black car that pulled over to the side of the road in front of him. Come on, get in, Jason. I'll take you back to the hotel. You can stay there until we figure everything out. Once we're there, you can tell me what the hell happened in the cave. Like the beginning of the day, Jason, Long, and Isabel were all in the hotel room. So, where did you guys go? Jason asked, just to start the conversation going. The sooner they were done here, the better. Jason did not feel much like talking. You were in that cave for hours. We returned to town. We had no way of entering or helping you in the Akashic, so we prepared for the worst here. There's no way I was gone for hours. It didn't take that long to... Time is different in the Akashic. Like in dreams, there's no real way for those inside of it to tell the true amount of time that is passing. Jason had no idea how the Akashic worked. He had no way to question that analysis. The problem is dealt with, though. There's no threat from Kamazatz. Jason stated this in a way that almost sounded like an excuse for what had happened. And your father? Gone. Everyone present seemed okay with leaving the explanation at that. So the portal's closed and there's no threat of Kamazatz. Jason nodded as an answer. Long decided he could trust this. They'd all be going. Time to clean what's left of this mess up. He took a card out of his pocket and left it on the counter. Contact this number if you ever need to contact us. You can also live in this room as long as you need to. That's already taken care of. With that, he walked out of the door. Isabel remained. She looked at him worriedly. I was a kid when I first saw a creature summon out of the Akashic. Like a lot of things in life, I don't think anyone ever really asked to be initiated into the world of the Akashic, the world of spells and monsters. We just sort of inherit it from others. My childhood friend and I, for instance, basically inherited the art from our parents. I actually came to this state looking for that old friend of mine. She seems to have lost her way. Anyway, I'll tell you about the first time I saw a creature from the Akashic. Jason wasn't sure why she was telling him this. Maybe it was her way of being more transparent about her own experiences. He did not have a choice on how open he could be about everything that had happened around him. He was just thrust in this situation and basically had his life upended while being questioned by her and Long after every turn. This could be her way of making things a little more equal between them, sharing her story. Whatever the case, Jason listened to Isabel's story intently.